Connecticut. A lot of questions that some of you might have. My first question is, what is Fracking Waste doing here? And we're going to be finding out in a little bit. So let me just introduce the panelists that have been invited. Jen Siskind is the local coordinator for Food and Water Watch. She's working to pass local ordinance and statewide legislation to ban importing fracking waste into Connecticut. She's available to give PowerPoint presentations, so if anyone needs a PowerPoint presentation, speak to her afterwards. To community groups, leaders, and coordinates with citizen groups to support the local campaigns. She's previously worked in the nonprofit sector, advocating for improved food security, services for impoverished seniors and persons with disabilities, and providing therapy in a psychiatric hospital setting. Food and Water Watch is a nonprofit organization that advocates for healthy, safe food access to safe, affordable drinking water. Ronna Stuller, yes. I asked each of them to send me a quick bio, and she said, growing up in a Philadelphia row house, Ronna developed an appreciation for the rich quality of life that an urban environment can provide inexpensively and efficiently. She is currently chair of the New London Green Party, serves on the Planning and Zoning Commission, and is co-founder treasurer of the Riverside Park Conservancy. Dagmar Noll is a volunteer organizer. Okay, Dagmar. And a member of the Eastern Connecticut Green Action, and serves on the Windham Energy Commission. So all three of these have been involved in different ways with the effort to ban, kind of in municipal by municipality, ban fracking waste. So part of the reason we're inviting them here is, one, to find out what it is, but two, to ask about what that process is like. And tonight, New London is actually considering the ban. They're going to be voting on it. We're hoping, yes. So we can find out a little bit more about that and what that looks like. So I'm going to turn it over to Jen, who's going to give us the introduction of what this is, and so you can find out more. And then we're going to come up and have a little bit of a conversation. So the chairs have been set up in that way.
Let me know if this is too loud. It seems okay? Seems good. Seems all right? Okay. When I first started working on fracking waste here in Connecticut, I realized that a lot of people might have heard about fracking. They knew it was controversial, but not many people really understood the waste issue. So when we started working on legislation, part of my effort was to go out across Connecticut in various libraries and community centers and here at Conn College today, and really educate people as to what the waste is and helping them to understand why we don't want it here in Connecticut. Here's an example of Pennsylvania, where you see all the little orange flags is where Pennsylvania and in the Northeast area waste from fracking is currently being disposed of. There are more than 10,000 fracking wells that have been drilled in the state of Pennsylvania. There's also tens of thousands of conventional wells. And they literally do not have enough places to put the waste. If you can see down in the bottom, just for 6 months of 2015, these wells produced 878 million gallons of liquid waste. And for the entire year of 2014, 1.9 billion gallons of liquid waste. And then there's additional solid waste. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of tons of solid waste that's also being produced. And this is just showing where it's being going in proximity to Pennsylvania. But Pennsylvania has been shipping their waste out to 8 different states. And there's currently efforts to try to bring it here to Connecticut. What's happening here? Sorry. Hold on 1 second. Okay, we're good now. So this is an example of what hydraulic fracturing is. Traditionally, conventional wells were built vertically, drilled straight down, and you can see there is just a very small impact into the shale. Much smaller quantities of fluids needed to be injected at high pressure to break up the rock in those areas. But about 10 years ago, Halliburton perfected a technique where after they drill 1 to 2 miles deep, they can then turn the drill bit horizontally and continue to drill 1 to 2 miles through the shale horizontally. And because of that, there's a much longer wellbore. It requires a larger quantity of injected fluids to fracture or crack open all the shale underground, and then to release the gas or oil. So we're dealing with waste, not only what we're injecting into it, which is a lot of different highly toxic chemicals, but also what naturally occurs in the rock formation buried underground. And there are lots of different toxins buried under there. This particular slide was produced by Ivan White, who works for a congressionally chartered radiation protection agency, and you can just see how you have a greater exposure because of the distance that you're traveling through the shale. And the Marcellus Shale in particular in Pennsylvania is known to be one of the most radioactive shale deposits in the country. And a number of years ago, the uranium industry was looking at Pennsylvania to possibly do uranium mining, but they found that there wasn't a real good concentrated seam of uranium. Instead, it's in pockets scattered throughout the shale. So unfortunately, it's showing up in the waste when we're drilling for oil and gas. And these are just some of the toxins that are naturally occurring in the ground that are known to be included in the waste that comes out of these wells and what they can do to the human body. Radium-226 in particular has a half-life of 1,600 years, meaning only half of the radioactivity will have decayed in that amount of time. It takes about 4,000 years for it no longer to be radioactive. And as it decays, it turns into other radioactive materials, polonium, lead-210, which is a radioactive form of lead, and then at the very end stage, it just turns into lead. So all the way across the process, you've got very toxic materials that are mingling and coming out of these wells. And here's some examples of some of the waste. This is called drilling mud or drilling fluid. They use chemicals to help the well bore drill down through the ground and lift the cuttings back up to the surface. So this is an example of what the muds look like. The drill cuttings are the actual solid earth that they take out of the ground. Then you've got the flowback waste, which is what they inject into the well at very high pressure to crack open the rock. Once they release that pressure, some of it automatically flows back up to the surface, hence its name. It includes all the toxic materials that they used in the well, and then it also includes any natural toxins that they've mingled with under the earth and pulled to the surface. Now, the shale deposit 350 million years ago was a shallow seabed. So in addition to oil and gas that has formed from all this decomposing organic matter, you've got the ancient seawater that's trapped in the shale. So when you're shattering the shale to extract the oil and gas, at the same time you're extracting this ancient seawater. It's about 8 times as salty as natural seawater of today. And because it's been sitting there brewing and stewing next to all these toxins that are buried in the ground, it's also radioactive and contains these other highly contaminating toxins. And a single well can produce 1 million gallons of this brine water. And unfortunately, the conventional wells, and in a very small number of states in the horizontally fractured wells, the brine is being used as a de-icer on roads because it is 8 times saltier than seawater. It melts ice very well. Or the brine is being dewatered, and then the salt product that's left over is being sold off as a salt product as well. And unfortunately, we're not separating out the toxins that occur when that happens. This infographic was created by the Physicians for Social Responsibility out in their Los Angeles office, and it's showing a study that was done back in 2011 by Dr. Theo Colburn. She looked at 649 known chemicals that were being reported in the states that are fracking, and found that 56% of them had scientific research done on them. The other 44%, there's no known knowledge as to what these chemicals do to the human body. So out of a little more than half of the 650 chemicals, she found that A little bit more than half of those were soluble in water, meaning it can run off and spill and leach through the ground. Or they're volatile, which means it could vaporize. These chemicals can travel through the air, so you can inhale them and be affected that way. They can also settle on your skin. They can settle on your patio furniture, on crops that are growing nearby, and then you can ingest the chemicals that way as well. And then all the different chemicals that she studied, these several hundred chemicals, what they do to the human body. Again, whether you can breathe them in and have your immune system or your respiratory system or your kidneys impacted, or whether you can drink contaminated water and have them impacted. And that was back in 2011. We now have more than 750 studies from peer-reviewed sources and journalistic research, and you can find those in a very easy-to-read synopsis in what's called the compendium that was put together by concerned health professionals of New York. And you can also find other sources which completely index the original scientific study. So if you're a science major and you want to slog through the scientific reports, you can do that. It's all fully referenced, but if you just want to read a brief description in one paragraph, you can find that in the compendium. And then what I've done is just pulled out a sample of some of the studies that I find to be most alarming that have been done by a variety of research institutions around the country. The Duke studies are multiple studies that are listed there. And the infographic that we previously saw from Dr. Colburn's work, that was 649 chemicals that were known to be used in fracking back in 2011. A study that Yale did last year, or released last year, the known chemicals are now up to 1,157. And also what we don't know is which chemicals have proprietary or trade secrets which don't have to be reported and are not accessible to the public. Now, this waste could be coming to Connecticut in a very short amount of time. We attempted to pass a statewide ban in bringing this waste in almost 3 years ago in 2014. And instead of getting that ban, we got a temporary moratorium. And unfortunately, the language was compromised before it passed out of the legislature, and it was changed to say that DEEP, or the Department of Energy or Environmental Protection, is mandated to submit regulations for review. And they can do that as early as this coming summer, and they can't do it any later than July 1st of 2018. And unfortunately, the Commissioner of DEEP, Commissioner Klee, is not in favor of a statewide ban. He's testified against it on several occasions, and he and his staff have repeatedly made comments that he can write rules that will keep Connecticut safe, will track it cradle to grave. Unfortunately, the way this waste is handled in states where we're fracking, Pennsylvania closest to us, the way it's mingled together, the way the waste is reused over and over at different well sites, and the fact that it's not adequately tested or categorized really make it impossible. So it's a nice soundbite in the paper, but in reality, any regulations will not keep Connecticut safe. And here you can see these 3 hazardous waste facilities. The one with the best record is in Bristol, and these are quarters that are tracked. So they've been out of compliance for 9 out of the past 12 quarters, or most of the past 3 years. Meriden has been out of compliance for every single quarter for the past 3 years, and they've had 1 significant violation. And Tradeby and Bridgeport had 1 quarter where they weren't in violation, but they've had, 7 quarters where they've had very significant violations. And this means that they're not adequately treating their waste, and then what they discharge out from their community is contaminated at levels beyond what they're legally allowed to do. And this is the waste that they currently are treating, so we certainly don't want to be sending them tens to hundreds of thousands of gallons of highly toxic waste that is potentially radioactive and also has many chemicals and natural toxins to deal with. And this is just a brief summary. This information was compiled by Rivers Alliance, And you can go to their website and click through on various links on their website and even read in more detail what the actual violations were, what chemicals were being released, what DEEP's response was. Typically, it was no further action at this time. And then here's the potential chain of contamination that can occur here in Connecticut. It takes thousands of tanker trucks to transport over 1 billion gallons of liquid waste. And what's happening in other states where all these trucks are on the roads is they're having accidents, they're spilling, their valves are either failing or being deliberately or mistakenly left open, and they're leaking as they're traveling along the road. They use hoses to transfer from the tanker trucks into storage containers and then into other facilities. The valves can fail on those hoses. It becomes a leak source as well. Once they come to a hazardous waste treatment facility, the facility is going to partially treat the waste. They're going to have a very highly concentrated sludge material that is even more toxic than what was brought to them because of its concentration levels. That's going to have to be disposed of somehow. And then they're going to have all this leftover treated water that could still be contaminated. And that could be sent out to wastewater treatment systems all around Connecticut. We have about 12 that accept non-household waste. And if DEEP writes regulations to send this effluent to them, then there's a continuing path of potential contamination that can occur. When you heat radium or any radioactive material, it's an inert material, so it's not impacted by the heat. So if a facility like New London accepts contaminated waste and the sludge in their treatment works gets contaminated, once they send their sludge from their facility off to a trash-to-energy incinerator, we're talking about emissions traveling through the air that are radioactive, and then the ash that needs to be cleaned out and disposed from those incinerators will still have the same radioactive levels as well. And then the problem with, because so much waste is being produced, it's been given these special permits called BUD permits. Beneficial use determination is what BUD stands for. So in some states, they're allowing the drill cuttings to be used as fill in various types of construction projects. And as I mentioned before, the brine is being spread on roads as a de-icer. And this is what activity initially started primarily in New York State, and the state of Vermont very early on, a couple of years ago, passed a ban on fracking and also a ban on handling any of the waste in the state. And where you see all the little small yellow, pink, and red spots, those are individual municipalities that passed special zoning regulations or passed ordinances that banned either fracking or the waste. And then the lighter overlay is specifically waste bans that have been passed. And in New York State, 15 counties, the legislatures of 15 counties have passed these bans. And Connecticut and Massachusetts are just starting to catch up. As you can see, there's only one town in Massachusetts that have passed an ordinance, and we're now up to 10 towns in Connecticut that have passed ordinances. We've been doing this in a variety of methods. We've been using legal petitions. If a town is allowed to initiate a petition according to their charter, or whether they don't have a charter at all and they follow state statute, or we've been seeking cooperation from town leaders and doing just very basic grassroots organizing, tabling at farmers markets and at festivals in towns, and sending out emails and Facebook posts and showing up at meetings and making public comment and turning in materials to town leaders. And this is what Connecticut looks like now. You can see the 3 hazardous waste treatment facilities in the green stars, and you can see the 12 towns that have publicly owned treatment works or wastewater treatment facilities that are publicly owned. Taxpayers pay for those facilities. And where we have interest across Connecticut and currently to pass a ban. How many people in the audience today, how many people live in Connecticut? 2, 3, okay. The 2 students that live in Connecticut, do you see your town on the map? Which town are you from?
Rocky Hill.
Rocky Hill?
Guilford?
And Guilford, great. Yeah. And New London is going to hopefully pass tonight. We have Ronna and Dagmar and other members of the Green Party who have been very active here in New London. And so we're just keeping our progress moving along. You know, this type of graphic, we've created pass-outs to people where it's printed on both sides of the half-page sheet to give people information, and then we've also tapered it or tailored it so we can use it as postcards to send out when we want to get people at meetings. And we encourage you to take action in your town, in your state, and if you're interested, we do have a petition here. We're welcome to pass it around. If you're not from Connecticut, you're welcome to sign on anyways if you just want to get connected with Food and Water Watch. Thank you very much.
So I'm curious if we want to just start in our conversation, like hearing about how two of you became involved with these efforts. Jump in on.
Well, I was the last to be involved, so maybe I should speak last.
I can talk a little bit about that. So I'm from Windham, Connecticut. Well, I live in Willimantic. It's a city in Windham. And I've been interested in environmental issues. I was aware of fracking, but there was no fracking in Connecticut. So when I heard that we were nevertheless possibly a target for some of this pollutant that I had learned so much about, I became concerned. And I learned this as my town was coming very, very close to potentially passing their own ordinance in town. They had been working on it, the folks who were working on it at the grassroots level had been working on it for many months, maybe years. Was it more than 1 year?
No, less than a year.
Yeah.
About 6 months.
It had gotten stalled, and they just kept at it. And we did have support from some of the town council members. One of them is here today. I came with my friend and council member James Flores. But it took a while to really work through the system. And near the end, when it was time to bring people out, that's one of my roles in town, is, you know, okay, bring people out who can contact folks. And I got in on that, and I decided I wanted to really help other towns move forward. So it has been very much a grassroots effort, and this group that I'm a part of called Eastern Connecticut Fracking Action, which is a citizen group, is people like you, people like me, getting together once a month. They talk about what issues, what legislation they want to support, etc. That's happening in the state, what sort of efforts, grants, things like that that citizens can maybe get in on, and we provide support on the eastern half of Connecticut. So I joined them immediately and have been helping them support towns ever since.
Yeah, I'm the local New London person, not a native New Londoner. I've only lived here since 1994, which barely counts for anything in this town. But a couple of local New Londoners went to an event that Eastern Connecticut Green Action held, I think in Willimantic.
No, it was Mansfield.
Oh, it was
December
Mansfield?
4th.
Okay.
Yep.
And I was not one of them. But I am chair of the New London Green Party, and we've been around in New London since 2001, running candidates for council and board of ed, and winning every so often. And some of these people came to our meeting that was, I think, a week later in December, and they wanted to do something. Now, I am not an expert on fracking waste, although I'm a conservationist and environmentalist, but that really hasn't been the focus of what I've done in the past several years. But what I could help with, and what the Green Party could help with, is navigating city government. Because Connecticut, for those of you who don't come from Connecticut, we're kind of a unique state in which we're very small in terms of area, but we have 169 separate municipalities that all do things in their own ways. So every town in Connecticut has different ways to bring this sort of initiative to see the light of day. Jen mentioned a few different ways, and New London is actually different from all of those. In New London, according to our charter, any citizen can bring a proposed ordinance to City Council, get it on the agenda, and Council is required to act on it within 60 days. So a friend of mine who was on the last Charter Revision Commission pointed me to this, and so we haven't had a long struggle. We kind of decided to do this in, in January. We had a group of of maybe half a dozen people who wanted to see this happen in New London. As you notice from the diagram there, New London has a blue star, so our wastewater treatment plant could be at risk for accepting some of this waste. And I think we met on a Monday or Tuesday night, and by Friday, we had the proposal submitted to get on the agenda for the City Council meeting 10 days away, and that meeting was a month ago, February 6th. And we got a really positive response. It would have been passed on the spot, except that the councilors wanted the city attorney to review the language. So it's coming tonight, and hopefully it will be a pretty smooth process, partly because of the municipalities that did it before us, and partly because of the idiosyncrasies of our own wonderful city.
I'm curious, just, and it might be different in each of the municipalities, but where are you getting pushback from? Like, what are the forces that are, and what are the reasons maybe of why we should accept? Because I'm really curious about how you were talking about the deep, the head is really not for a statewide ban.
Right.
So what are some of the issues around that?
Well, initially on a state level, we had certain members of the legislature saying if you put in this ban, you're going to stand in the way of jobs in Connecticut. It's also an income source for the state. They would have income from the permit fees for each truckload that comes and dumps off in our state. And then the individual towns that accept the effluent, I believe they get like 5 cents to the gallon of effluent that they receive. So there's a potential income source, but that's a very short-sighted view because the risks of contamination are so high and the costs for remediation, if you can even do it, would far exceed the incomes that we would likely receive. So that's part of the pushback. Sometimes it's party line as well. I had one particular council member in Branford who was the majority leader who came up to me after the presentation and said, I really understand why you're for this, but sometimes you just have to stick with your party. And so then you're wondering whether parties are being influenced by the industry, whether they've been politically captured because of campaign contributions coming in from the oil and gas industry. You know, these are potential sideliners too. So we've had very little pushback so far.
And it kind of sounds like...
Yeah, it's really been in pocketed areas. The city of Branford was, or the town of Branford is really the only one we've had a lot of resistance from. In Wyndham, when you guys were passing, there was a little bit of delay in questioning and worry that it was getting stuck in committee and not really being moved forward. But once all the questions were being answered, and it doesn't necessarily pass on its merits, you need to have the community organizing done to really put the political pressure forward, and that's what Dagmar and Ronna and the Green Party and Eastern Connecticut Green Action have been so helpful with.
Some folks also aren't sure whether we'd really be a target for this, whether their towns would really be a target for that, and they don't always really understand the full impact of what it would mean to bring this stuff in. Or they say, oh, DEEP will take care of it. I've gotten a little bit of that. And in my experience, there is actually very little sort of partisan resistance now, which may be affecting the broader support that we're getting now on the state level.
It was interesting in Branford, it was the minority leader that brought it forward as the champion. And first it was in their Rules and Ordinance Committee, and then when it passed out, the majority leader came out very strongly against it. And by the time it came to a vote, and they have what's called a representative town meeting government, basically a town council of 30 members. And by the time it got there, the RTM requires any correspondence that gets sent to them under 300 words to be read aloud by the moderator of the meeting. And we helped to organize 35 people to write letters in support. And we were hoping to flip 4 of the majority party so that we would have a majority vote that night. And at the beginning of the meeting, when the moderator was reading through all these letters, it took an hour to read through 35 letters. And we ended up flipping 11 people to vote for it. That was a huge number. And members that had known or had come to the meeting initially planning to vote against it. And whether it was town residents or there's a scientist that's been working on health issues with the community in southwestern Pennsylvania where there's a lot of drilling. She happened to be a Branford resident, so she wrote a letter in as well. And really, power to the people is really how this is moving forward. And,
Yeah, sounds like
getting
it.
involved.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the part that I found particularly exciting about it and that I wanted to hear more about as well is just that, so much of what we assume politics is national politics. And like our experience is so much about the largeness that the national scene is that we forget about kind of the way in which local politics matter.
And actually, local politics matters a lot more. And we did not in New London have any kind of partisan pushback because, frankly, this is a democratic town. Of our elected officials, 14 out of 15 are Democrats and the 15th is Green. So there is not a single current elected Republican in town. So that wasn't relevant, but when Jen mentioned the possible financial advantage, short-term, of accepting this waste, that crossed people's minds. When we first casually mentioned to the mayor that we were going to be bringing this, to give him the heads up, his first question was, would we get money for this? And we said, yes, but it would not, it wouldn't compensate for the risks we would be taking on. And so we had to tailor our argument in New London to some extent a little bit away from the environmental side and skew it towards the economic development side. The waste treatment plant in New London that could accept this effluent is in Fort Trumbull, which has been a challenge for the city to develop for 15 years. So we made the argument, it's like, this is going to hamper development still more. It's been a challenge, but from an economic development point of view, how can you market some kind of upscale development when you're taking in hazardous waste? So I think working within each town's idiosyncrasies is really important. And this fight might look very different in different areas.
That's interesting, yeah. I'm curious then, given what you're saying about the kind of the way, the argument for jobs, the argument for money, if you find that communities that are cash-strapped are considering this more or having a harder time. Like New London is cash-strapped, so is that becoming a play for some of the communities?
I don't know. In New London, as I said, the economic development argument kind of
You were able to
carries-
twist that, it sounds.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think there usually is the potential to twist it because many cash-strapped communities became that way because of some poor decision-making in the past, that there were things done for short-term gain that really didn't pan out to be very beneficial in the long run. And we're starting to see some of those mistakes that happened in the 60s and the 70s that we're still living with the consequences of. So I think that the leaders of these cities are kind of sensitive to that argument, that this really doesn't create the kind of economic development that we're looking for.
And then you have to look at other financial risks as well. It's not just the health risks, but if a city takes on effluent that hasn't been properly cleaned, they won't have the easy solution of sending their sludge from their treatment facility off to the local incinerator. If it's found out to be radioactive, they're going to have to be shipping it, clear across the country to a radioactive waste site. And then you've got issues such as the shellfish industry, the local fishing industry, your beach use, your tourism. Again, the radioactive materials have such a long radioactive half-life that the impacts are really going to be long-term.
And I was thinking back to that earlier map that you had on, that was the regional map, that it looks like where this waste is going are a lot of poor communities in the Appalachian region, in Ohio, West Virginia, and so, that is, that of course is compounding on kind of decades of other environmental issues that these same communities are dealing with. So I imagine in the long term, we're just going to, they're going to continue to be the communities, the poor working class, formerly coal communities, would be my guess about a lot of the ones that are receiving that.
Well, wherever the shale is buried underground is where the drilling is taking place. So you've got, like my parents' house, there's a well pad 2,000 feet away from the mother's bedroom window now. There are elementary schools which have frac pads within a half mile. There are high schools that have leased their property out for drilling, and I've got a horrendous picture of the high school track team running on their field, and in the background, just a couple thousand feet away, is a huge drilling derrick sticking up. You've got millions of people that are now living within a half mile of a shale pad. So, and just the fact that there's so much waste being produced, no one's really for where it's going. And another issue for towns is, whether you are adjacent to a facility or have a facility in your town, you're talking about thousands of tanker trucks that are coming back and forth. You have to times the number of trucks by 2 because you've got the trips coming in and then the trips leaving. And the quality of life, if any spills occur, the property values that are going to depreciate. There are, unfortunately, a lot of farmers have been leasing their land, or there are farmers out west who never had their subsurface property rights, and their farms are being impacted. And where spills are occurring, nothing's growing years later. The salts and the contaminants are so severe that it just completely leaves the land sterile.
So it's no secret that undesirable industry targets impoverished regions, and Willimantic is quite poor. And we have historically been a target for polluting industries who think that we want the money. So in our town, whatever interest there is in, what money this will bring, the people themselves will repeatedly have risen up and said, yeah, we need jobs, but not this way. So this is the latest instance of the people themselves in a town rejecting this. And when I continue to go from town to town, my town, Wyndham, is right here, okay? It's right here, and Willie is that top, this little corner here. And our water comes from this town, that red town up there, and a couple of these yellow towns. When you look at this issue, there's also the issue of looking at watersheds. Polluted watershed, you know, it was great having my town in it. That's great, this stuff isn't going to be coming into Wyndham. But which towns feed our water? If we didn't pass it, what does the Willimantic River feed? Who's downstream who is getting this? So as we're going from town to town to town, there's really a sense from the people, the citizens who want to work on this, that we're all in this together. That this is something that if all the towns don't band together, or if the state doesn't reverse what they've already put forward and put forward a strong ban, that it's not enough just to protect ourselves. So we have people in towns that have passed bans saying, where can I help next? Can I help my neighbors? Can I support them? And that is also happening. There's a very strong core group of people who are done in their town and say to their neighbors, hey, we share watersheds, we share water. How can we protect our region?
And you see the New London is the first in our area. So hopefully it will filter to the surrounding communities, especially because of our proximity to water. Stormwater runoff pollution is a huge issue in New London, both the Thames River and Long Island Sound. So we're really in a great location for this to come to.
This was, you were kind of raising, or one of the questions that I had asked was like, what are the environmental justice issues related to fracking waste? And I think you were starting to talk about it in terms of kind of the history of targeting poor communities for waste from, and I'm just curious, are there other issues that you're seeing emerge around issues of environmental justice within this?
Oh, yeah. Well, New London is not only poor, but I think it's beyond just financial poverty that makes some communities have low status within the state. And preservation of open space is another piece that's kind of related in terms of environmental justice. During the brief intro, I was introduced as being part of the Riverside Park Conservancy. And in 2011, the only public open space in this part of the city, off campus, which is the area where most of the low-income housing is, was almost sold. And I don't think anyone would have considered selling Ocean Beach or a park near the hospital, which is the part of town I live in. But this park was off the beaten track, and just a couple blocks away from the Thames River Apartments, which are the most notorious of the low-income housing projects in town. When Winthrop School, which is the closest elementary school, was a neighborhood school. It isn't anymore, it's a magnet. We had a magnet system. But when it was a neighborhood school, the last year it functioned that way was 2008 and 9. And if you looked at strategic school profiles, the fitness levels of the students at that school was under 2% passing the 4th grade fitness test, compared to over 30% of the students passing it statewide. So you could really see the impact of these kids who lived in these apartment buildings, not having access to open space, not being able to get exercise. There were also high asthma rates and high allergy rates. And so, yeah, I think that protecting open space is a huge issue, especially in poor communities.
And that's a good point, bringing up the asthma rates, because the air pollution and issues of respiratory illness or COPD in environmental justice communities, particularly Bridgeport. The incidence of childhood asthma and residents with COPD is so much higher than the rest of the state because of all the industry that they have there. And we know that the chemicals that are used in fracking can travel through the air and can directly impact the respiratory system. So we're just, if they receive this waste and if there are spills or if there's any kind of runoff in the area, it's just aggravating a problem that is already quite critical around town.
I want to, would you want to go and see if it just arrived? There's a question, we're running out of checking. Yeah, because you had checked it before. I have ordered some snacks. I'm unclear if they're going to make it. So but I want to make sure that we end in enough time to enjoy them. My hope is that they're going to be out there because we can't stay in the room here. But I want to turn kind of. Do we see it? Yes. All right. That's great. So I want to turn to ask if there's questions from the audience. If people have some questions, I have some more. But I was thinking before totally turning it over, the last question that would be like is why should, well wait, actually, before. How many of you, so there was 2 from Connecticut, how many of you are from Massachusetts? All right, so we've got a couple more. You saw your one, you only have one place up there. So is Massachusetts the next place? Should they start organizing?
We hope so. Toxics Action Center and MassCan, Climate Action Network, had a big conference at Northeastern University yesterday, and I gave this presentation, and hopefully we'll get some interest in Massachusetts to start working on this.
What about Rhode Island?
Rhode Island, I'm not aware that the waste ban right now. Rhode Island's struggling to try to stop the building of extensive pipelines and gas-powered energy systems and liquefied natural gas plants. So they're pretty busy at the moment with those issues. So,
Any other New England states?
No,
Go ahead, ask a question, yeah.
Okay, well it's kind of random because I know Vermont has this like kind of attitude of always being really environmentally friendly and proactive, but how could Connecticut or other New England states like I'm from Massachusetts get on that whole statewide ban level? Is Vermont the only state that's done it, or is it kind of
so far, Vermont is the only state that has banned fracking and handling of the waste, and Connecticut and Maryland are the only 2 states that are currently operating with a moratorium. And the state of New York has a ban on the high volume horizontal fracturing, but there's a lot of drilling for gas and some drilling for oil in New York State already. So they are fracking in New York, but not with this horizontal high volume method. And that's why so many of those counties in New York are passing, and they are continuing with activity in New York as well. So the original ban in Connecticut was brought forward by consumer and environmental advocacy groups and about a half dozen core legislators. That built to a few dozen legislators that had signed on to co-sponsor the legislation in 2014. And in part because the regulations can be submitted for review as early as this coming summer, and because of the success we've had passing local ordinances, 4 bills went to the state legislature this year that were proposed. 3 of them were to extend the review out several years, and one of them, which came from 2 Republican and 1 Democratic legislator from this town of Windsor, where they also passed a local ordinance, said their proposed language was to just remove the authority for DEEP to be able to submit these regulations, which would in effect allow the moratorium to continue permanently. So we're waiting for the Environment Committee to draft this language, and it has to pass out of that committee, and then it has to pass out of other committees, and then it has to get a vote on the House floor and the Senate floor, and hopefully we can get it through this year. So we're also encouraging people to contact their state representatives that work at the LOB in Hartford, it's easy to do. You can just Google Connecticut General Assembly or CGA, find your legislator, and you can, type in the information, and then just give them a quick phone call. Their aide will answer, and you can just say, I'd like to have this waste ban passed in Connecticut permanently.
Now, listening to what Jen said about the whole process makes me really think about what the difference is between organizing on your municipal level and organizing on the state level. And citizens can get more done on their local level. Our elected officials, they see us every day. We know them. They don't, and lobbyists spend a lot more time up in Hartford than they do in the cities. For just this reason, if our councilors vote against this, every time they see me, they're going to go like that. We're a small city, so, it will happen frequently. So it's a lot easier for citizens to help their own municipalities and towns be on the forefront of doing this kind of thing. The state, I think, will eventually pass it, but it won't be the forerunner. The cities will have to be the forerunners.
I'm curious if you see more and more kind of organizing happening in this way. Is this becoming the new?
Well, for anything environmental, it's critical that people are working on a local and a state level right now. As much as anybody who's upset about how the current national election turned out, anybody who's opposed to the policies that are being released by the Trump administration or by the Republican-dominated Congress, we do need to recognize that there's very little power that a Democrat or a Green Party or a Working Family Party has at this moment at a federal level. It's basically locked up at the moment, and there's this symbiotic relationship kind of going between the far-right Christian conservatives and the Republican Party and the Trump administration right now to basically butter each other's breath. And the only real power that we have right now, if you care about environmental issues, is to work on a state and local level. So as much as we encourage everybody to be out there protesting and using social media and showing up in Washington on April 29th for the Climate March, 350 Connecticut is organizing buses if anybody wants to go. As much as we need to keep loud and keep promoting our environment, at the same time we have to make sure that we're involved in activity that has the ability to make lasting legal change. And that's what we're doing with local ordinances and trying to get this bill through.
Who are the folks from Connecticut who are here again? And you're also from Connecticut, obviously, so we got maybe 4 or 5 people. All right, I do have some paperwork on what you can do regarding the state bill. There are a couple things you can do, and some of them take 5 minutes, and some of them take 15 minutes. So please talk with me after. I'll give you a sheet.
And if you're not from Connecticut, if you have a really good friend that listens to your advice, that lives in Connecticut, if your roommate would be willing to make a call, please take a sheet and give it to them.
Please.
Yeah,
Yeah, this is more of an acknowledgement and a comment than it is a question, but I figured I'd do it because people here are into the environment and whatnot. But it's sort of just an acknowledgement that this institution, Connecticut College, though not fracking related, does invest some of its endowment money in the fossil fuel industry. And just for everyone here, the student government is trying to get the school to divest these investments and move them to sustainable funds. So this Thursday at 7:15 p.m. our student government is going to bring up a resolution to divest from the fossil fuel. This Thursday at 7:15 p.m. in Earns. And also, just a couple weeks ago, we had a student write a resolution supporting the fracking ban in New London, who's in touch with Andrew Lopez, who and the student government passed it. So there's also things to do related to the institution itself and where our investments are going, sort of that go beyond. That affect us all as students here as well.
And you can also, we've created a change.org petition about divesting from Connecticut College, so alumni can weigh in and voice their opinions. So I'm sure anyone who is in this room can go and sign that. It's just a change.org if you want. So.
That's good to hear. The city of New London actually divested from fossil fuels a couple years ago. The former mayor back who had a mixed record in many ways, but this was one very positive thing he had done, was divesting investments from the fossil fuel industry.
I also want to encourage folks, it's exciting to hear that you're working on this in your student government. I would really encourage folks to get involved at some level in your student government. I was at the very edges when I was in college. I don't even remember what my position was. I did have some kind of representative position at one point. I would just go to a couple meetings. Go and support them, and also go back to your towns. If you have even a remote interest in really impacting your municipalities, consider running for office in November. Your municipal elections are happening. If any of you are graduating, you might have more time. I know it's tough when you're in college, but get involved either in your student government or in, what's your position?
President Siri Colom.
Excellent. Well, that's awesome what you're doing. That's so cool.
I'll just add, when Dagmar said, consider when you're, after you graduate running for office, every city has appointed boards and commissions as well, and some of them have considerable power in town. Every town is different, what's elected, what's appointed, but it really can make a difference. If you can't always get elected when you're young and people don't know you and you haven't lived someplace for 30 years, but often you can get appointed to a board or a commission that deals with something you're really passionate about and that can do something about it.
Although sometimes you can't. Jonathan Pelto is an example of somebody who was young, so don't totally discourage if you want to go after it.
That's true, and we had Andre Baumgartner, who was the youngest state rep elected, I think. He was, at the celebratory party, he couldn't drink because he wasn't 21.
But I'm also a commission member. I just joined a couple months ago. I had actually been clerking their meetings for extra money. So I was sitting there taking their notes, and then citizens' comment period would come up, and I would yak. And I finally said, you know what, I'm quitting this job and I'm joining the commission. So look it up, go for it.
Any last questions before we? Well, I want to thank the three of you so much for taking your time and joining and coming and speaking to us about the work that you're doing. It's really pretty exciting. I love learning about kind of grassroots activism, and I really love being able to share or having the opportunity to share with students this idea that, as you both pointed out, or as all of you pointed out, that you can start now to become politically involved and make changes, and don't wait to become big or whatever it is. Like, start now because you're interested and you're invested, and get involved at a small level, and then and you'll see the way that politics works, and it can be fascinating, it can be discouraging, it can be exciting, but we are all, whether we engage or not, we are politically active. By just sitting back passively, we're politically active, just maybe in a way that perhaps we could do so much more by getting involved. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Let's encourage everyone to go out and get some